All right, I'm going to do several examples using order of operations and also talk about absolute value. Let's get started. All right, we're being asked to rewrite without absolute value. So what you do is you just take the larger number and subtract the smaller number. Since the square root of 3 is approximately 1.7, then the correct answer here would be 5 minus the square root of 3. That would be the exact value. So you always want your answer to be positive, and that's because absolute value is the distance between two numbers. So if we had, for example, the absolute value of -5, that would be a positive 5. Okay, now notice that if I took 0 plus a -5, that is the same thing as -5. And if we look at the absolute value there, that would be like looking at the distance between 0 and -5. And the distance between those two numbers is a positive 5. So distance is positive, absolute value is always positive. Is always a positive number. Okay, so that's why we want to take the larger number minus the smaller number here, because that would guarantee that our answer, when we subtract those two, is positive, because the larger number is first. All right, now we're going to use order of operations. And order of operations is goes parentheses, and that's any sort of a grouping symbol, and then exponents, and then multiplication or division, whichever comes first from left to right, and then addition or subtraction, whichever comes first left to right. Okay, so let's do this problem here. We've got the absolute value of -2 minus 10, and absolute value is like its own little grouping symbol. So first we want to do simplify those numbers inside there. Now we write just -10, but that really is the same thing as adding the opposite of 10. So -10 is the same as plus a -10. So we've got -2 plus 10 more negatives. That gives us -12. And let's see, I'm going to just keep copying this down. 12 minus, let's see, the 2 is being squared, so it'd be 12 minus 4. And then 12 minus 4 is 8. Okay, so remember, when you see a negative sign, that really is the same thing as plus a negative. So you can think of this as -2 times 8, which would give us a -16. The absolute value of -12, that is a positive 12. So we've got 12 plus -16, and that would give us, when I look at these, I just find the difference between those two numbers. The difference between 12 and 16 is 4, and there's more negatives, so the final answer is negative. And we're done. So I just want to really emphasize that subtraction means add the opposite. Okay, so 3 minus 5, you can think of money like you have $3, and then you take a debit out of your account of 5, you'd be overdrawn $2. You can also think of it as like a slide, that subtraction is a slide downwards. So if we start at 3, we could slide down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're ending up at -2. All right, the way I think of this often is I've got 3 positives, 5 negatives, and they're going to just cancel each other out, right? We've got a positive cancels out a negative. They're just taken out, and what we've left over is 2 negatives. So you just find the difference between the two numbers, and the one with the larger absolute value gets to dictate the final sign of the answer. So there were more negatives to begin with, so we're left with a negative answer. On this one, we're starting at -3. All right, so if I'm thinking, so here I'm at -3, and you can think of that as a slide down. And I don't want to insult you by drawing all these pictures, but it will kind of help just to have this visual. So -3, and then we slide down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that gives us, we're down at -8. All right, and then if you're thinking in terms of the battle, between the positives and the negatives, we've got 3 negatives, 5 negatives. So altogether, they're just growing in number. We're at -8. All right, so that's just a little quick, some of my thoughts of how to think about positive and negative numbers. And now let's look at what happens when we multiply a negative times a negative. 3. All right, so on this one, I have -3 times -5. So this right in here is multiplication, which I'm going to do on top first, because this fraction bar is kind of like two separate little grouping symbols. First, we have to figure out the numerator, and then we have to figure out the denominator, and then at the very end, that fraction bar just means division. Okay, so up we are in the numerator. We've got -3 times -5. Negative times a negative is a positive. -3 times -5 is a positive 15. But why? Why is a negative times a negative positive? Well, first let's just look at this as 3 times, take a different problem. 3 times 5, that is 3 sets of positive 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we've got 3 of those sets. And that obviously gives us a positive 15. Okay. Positive 15. How about 3 sets of -5? Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3 sets of -5. And that would give us, obviously, -15. That would be a -15. Okay, now what about -3 times -5? You can think of -3 as the opposite of 3. Okay, so -3, what this means is it's the opposite of 3. So we have the opposite of 3, and then so we have 3 sets. It's like the opposite of this problem, right? So we have the opposite of -15. The opposite of a -15 is a positive 15. So that's where you get your positive 15. You can also think of this, some people think of this in terms of direction. So if you have your car and you're facing north, your little car is facing in the north direction, and you go, so if you think of north as positive and south as negative, if you're facing north, so that's a positive, times a positive, that would be going forward. Okay, a negative times a negative would be I'm facing south. So my little car is, sorry about my drawing. Terrible car. Okay, but there's my little car, right? I'm facing south, but I'm reversing. And so then what's the direction we end up going? If we're going in reverse, then we end up going north. So that would be going in the positive direction. All right, so 2 different ways of thinking about that. Now, back to our problem. We have -3 times -3. We figured that out is a positive 15. And then I'm just going to keep writing the +6 up on the top. Okay, so there's my numerator. And then in the denominator, I have 12 plus a -2 times a positive 6. That's the opposite of 2 groups of 6. So it would be a -12. And then we would get on the numerator 15 plus 6. That is 21. And then 12 plus -12 is 0. All right, now this is what we call undefined, and that's the answer. Okay, because we have this strange situation that you can think of it like $12 or $21 shared with no one. Where did the money go? It's actually kind of a bizarre mathematical idea. We're taking something and sharing it among 0 people. So we just have to agree that we call that undefined in math. All right, I'm giving you a challenge. So I'm going to give you some time to work on this. Get out a piece of paper and you're going to work through the whole problem yourself. And then pause the video and see how you do. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video and start working. All right, you should have done this grouping symbol in the top, and then also this absolute value is a grouping symbol. Okay, so your first step, we should have in the numerator negative 10 plus 3 times negative 2 quantity squared. And then that is 5 times the absolute value. 1 minus 4, that's the same thing as 1 plus a negative 4. So we have the difference between 1 and 4 is 3. There's more negatives to start with, so that's negative 3. Minus 15 divided by 3. That we're going to do first because division comes first from left to right, and then we'll multiply that by 2. All right, so if you made any mistakes in that first step, go ahead and pause again and see if you can figure it out. The correct final answer is going to be 2/5. See if you can get there. All right, next step. We would have, all right, so we get negative 10 plus 3 times negative 2 quantity squared. The only thing being squared is the negative 2. So I have negative 2 times negative 2 is a positive 4. And then I have 5 times the absolute value of negative 3. Absolute value of negative 3 is a positive 3. And then I'll go ahead and do that 15 divided by 3 is a positive 5 times 2. Okay, and that would give us negative 10 plus 12 all over 15 minus 10, and you can think of that as plus a negative there. So we would get positive 2, and then in the denominator I have 15 minus 10, which is 5. And that's done.